Iceland's south coast looks unreal on camera, but the real Iceland south coast experience is colder, wilder, more expensive, and more intense than most people expect. In this Iceland travel guide, I'll take you on a 12-hour south coast tour from Reykjavik with Skogafoss, Seljalandsfoss, Reynisfjara Black Sand Beach, Dyrhólaey, hidden gems, real prices, tour experience, and the mistakes most first-timers make. And by the end of the day, one waterfall would completely change how I saw this South Coast road trip, but not the one you'd expect. On our third and final day in Iceland, we started early in the morning with Glasgow to explore the South Coast. Reykjavik was still quiet, the sky already shifting between grey and silver, the kind of morning where you know the weather has plans of its own. This day was part of a collaboration, but as my subscribers already know, I only recommend experiences I would genuinely choose again. And after spending the day with them, I understood why they were confident enough to show the experience exactly as it is. After leaving Reykjavik, we drove for about 1 hour and passed through Selfoss, the largest town in the southern part of Iceland. The weather was already changing constantly. One moment the rain stopped and the road ahead opened up, the next moment it started again and the windshield became a blur. This was exactly the kind of day where I felt happy to be in Glasgow's Toyota RAV4 instead of gripping the wheel myself on an unfamiliar Iceland road. As we continued along the south coast, the landscape started to become more dramatic. Green cliffs stretched along the road, waterfalls appeared from different corners, and suddenly the drive felt less like transportation and more like entering another world. The kind where the map stops mattering and you just stare out the window. On the way, we stopped briefly when we saw a traditional Icelandic turf house covered with grass. But Hamid told us we would see even more ahead, so we continued toward the first major stop of the day. Our first major stop was Skogafoss, one of the most impressive waterfalls in Iceland, and for me, one of the strongest visual openings you can have on a South Coast tour. Located in Katla Geopark, Skogafoss is very easy to reach from the parking area, and the scenery around it already feels cinematic, with green fields, animals, cliffs, and the waterfall standing powerfully in the background. You can see it from below, climb the stairs to view it from above, or move around the lower area for different angles. Skogafoss is around 60 meters high and more than 25 meters wide, but what many people do not realize is how difficult it can be to film properly. The powerful flow of the Skoga River creates constant mist in front of the waterfall, so you get wet very quickly, and your camera lens needs to be cleaned again and again. I was cold, wet, and constantly fighting the spray, but at the same time, this was the exact kind of raw Iceland travel moment that makes the country unforgettable. Entrance to Skogafoss is free, but if you are driving yourself, parking is around €7, similar to many popular landmarks in Iceland. My honest advice is simple: bring waterproof shoes, a proper jacket, and something to protect your camera or phone. I watched several people walk up in sneakers, take one photo, and immediately retreat to the parking lot. Skogafoss looks easy from a distance, but the closer you get, the more you realize that Icelandic nature does not care about your comfort. After Skogafoss, we drove about 6 minutes and stopped briefly near Skogar Museum to film the traditional Icelandic turf houses. I'm not usually the type of traveler who stops for museums during a road trip, but seeing these 200-year-old grass-covered roofs under the rain made the past feel suddenly practical, not distant. In a country with harsh weather and limited timber, turf was not just tradition, it was survival. From Skogar Museum, we drove only about 1 minute and started walking toward Kvernufoss waterfall. If you drive yourself, parking here is around €5, so it is another small cost to calculate on a South Coast road trip. The walk was longer than Skogafoss, and the weather was becoming more difficult, but the path itself was beautiful green landscapes, running water, silence, and almost nobody else around. Already this top felt completely different from the more famous waterfalls, more like discovering something than visiting something. I still didn't know that this would be the moment that surprised me the most all day. As Kvernufoss started to appear between the rocks, the atmosphere changed completely. It felt like walking into an old mystical movie scene where a dragon could appear from behind the cliffs or some ancient creature could wake up from one of the caves. Kvernufoss is not the biggest waterfall in Iceland, but because of its location, rock formations, and peaceful atmosphere, it was the most hidden gem moment of the entire trip for me. You can walk around Kvernufoss, capture it from the side, and even go behind the waterfall for beautiful photos and videos. But the ground can be dangerously slippery here, especially after rain. The rocks are uneven, and the mist makes them worse than they look. I found a sheltered spot away from the spray and flew the drone to capture this place from above. And only from the air did I fully understand why Kvernufoss feels so hidden. It sits tucked into a cleft that the road simply doesn't reveal. Honestly, if a friend asked me what to do on the Iceland south coast, I would say, do not skip Kvernufoss. After Kvernufoss, we got back on the road and the weather became heavier. Visibility dropped so much at one point that the mountains ahead simply disappeared into grey. The rain became stronger and the day started to show us the less romantic side of Iceland travel, the side where you can't see the view you paid to see and you're just hoping the road stays safe. This is one of the biggest lessons of Iceland. The country is beautiful, but the weather can change quickly. And if you are driving yourself, that beauty can also become genuinely stressful. By lunchtime, we were cold, hungry, and ready for a proper break, so we arrived in Vik, one of the most important villages on the South Coast route. We stopped at Smidjanbruggas, a local burger house, and had a very good burger for around 25 euros. Iceland is definitely not cheap, but after a wet and windy morning, the kind where your fingers are still stiff from the cold, that burger, those fries, and just sitting somewhere warm felt like exactly what we needed. After lunch, we drove toward Viki Myrdal Church, the symbolic church of Vik. This is not a long stop, but it gives you one of the easiest postcard views in the area. The red roof against the green hill, the black sand in the distance. From here you can see Reynisfjara Black Sand Beach, and honestly, standing there looking at it, I felt a mix of excitement and unease, because I already knew what makes that beach so dangerous. If you climb a little higher, you can frame the church, the village, the coastline, and the dramatic Icelandic landscape together. But the church is just the warm-up. What comes next is the most dangerous beach in Iceland. After the church, we continued to Reynisfjara Black Sand Beach, one of the most famous and dangerous natural landmarks in Iceland. If you come by car, parking is around 7 euros, and right next to the parking area, there is Black Beach Restaurant, where visitors can find food, drinks, and facilities. But the moment you step past the building, the sand takes over black, endless, and already humming with the sound of waves that feel closer than they look. When you first walk onto Reynisfjara Beach, the endless black sand looks incredible. But the danger here is very real, and it's not obvious until you understand what sneaker waves are. These waves can arrive suddenly, reach much farther than expected, and pull people toward the ocean before they even understand what is happening. This is not a place to turn your back on the water for a photo. Keep a safe distance always. Most people do not spend a long time at Reynisfjara, maybe only a few minutes, especially in bad weather. But sometimes the value of a place is not about how long you stay there, but how strongly it makes you feel something. Reynisfjara made me feel admiration, fear, and respect at the same time, because it reminds you that nature is not a theme park designed for travelers. Because the wind was getting stronger, Hamid was slightly concerned about our next stop. And honestly, when an experienced local guide becomes careful, you understand that Iceland is not a place where you should ignore weather conditions. But since we were already there and wanted to capture the route properly, we continued toward Dyrhólaey. After driving up to Dyrhólaey, we started walking toward the viewpoints. If you drive yourself, parking is around €5, so this is another small cost to include in your South Coast budget. This place gives you a completely different perspective of the South Coast. You're now high above everything you spend the day walking through. On one side, you see green cliffs and puffins flying around. On the other side, you see endless black sand beaches stretching into the distance. And suddenly the scale of Iceland hits you in a way it doesn't from the ground. At the highest point of the peninsula, you find Dyrhólaey Lighthouse, one of the most visually striking spots on this route. From the area near the lighthouse, the view of the massive sea arch, the birds flying around it, and the waves crashing below felt like the final shot of a film. Even with fog and difficult weather, Dyrhólaey was one of the most powerful stops of the entire South Coast road trip. Dyrhólaey is beautiful, but the cliffs here are high. The ground gets extremely slippery when wet, and the wind near the edge can knock you off balance before you realize it. I felt it myself. One gust near the viewpoint made me take an involuntary step sideways, and that was enough to remind me how quickly things can go wrong. The views are already incredible from safe areas, so stay back, take your time, and respect the conditions. No photo is worth the risk. Our final stop of the day was Seljalandsfoss, one of the most popular and crowded waterfalls on South Coast tours. We had passed it earlier and decided to visit it on the way back to Reykjavik. If you drive yourself, parking here is around €7, and the first thing we noticed was the number of large tour buses. After the quiet intimacy of Kvernufoss, this felt like arriving at a completely different Iceland. It immediately showed how popular this waterfall really is. Seljalandsfoss is very close to the parking area, and at first glance, it looks like a slightly smaller version of Skogafoss. But what makes Seljalandsfoss special is something Skógafoss cannot offer: a deep opening behind the waterfall. This allows you to walk behind the falling water and capture one of the most unique views in Iceland, the world seen through a curtain of water. The path behind Seljalandsfoss can be very slippery, and getting wet here is almost guaranteed. After a full day of rain, wind, waterfalls, and cold weather, walking behind the waterfall felt like the perfect final test, the kind where you're already soaked. So you stop caring and just take it in. I was tired, soaked, and honestly not at my most glamorous moment. But standing behind that curtain of water, hearing nothing but the roar and feeling the spray on my face, it was an unforgettable ending to the day. After an intense, wet, cold, and beautiful day, we started the drive back to Reykjavik. I spent most of the return journey half asleep, half awake, the kind of exhaustion that only comes from a day where nature genuinely tested you. When we arrived back in Reykjavik, we said goodbye to Hamid, thanked him for the unforgettable Iceland adventure, and ended the night with a quick dinner at Reykjavik Fish before returning to our hotel. So how much did this South Coast day cost for us, not including the private tour itself? Since this was a private tour with Glacigo, parking fees were included, so our only direct personal cost during the day was lunch in Vik, around €25 per person before dinner. But if you rent a car and follow the same route yourself, parking at Skogafoss, Kvernufoss, Reynisfjara, Dyrhólaey, and Seljalandsfoss can add around €31 before fuel, insurance, food, and the rental car itself. Because this day was part of a collaboration with Glacigo, I did not pay the normal private tour price, so always check current tour prices before booking. The cheapest way to do the Iceland South Coast is usually renting a car and sharing fuel, insurance, parking and food costs with other travelers. But cheapest on paper does not always mean easiest. I've driven in enough countries to know that bad weather, long hours, and unfamiliar roads can turn a cheap road trip into an expensive headache, especially in Iceland. So, is Iceland's South Coast worth visiting? Absolutely yes. In one long day from Reykjavik, you can see Skogafoss, Skogar Museum, Kvernufoss, Vík Myrdal Church, Reynisfjara Black Sand Beach, Dyrhólaey Lighthouse, and Seljalandsfoss, an incredible amount of natural beauty for one route. Few places on earth give you this much variety in a single tank of fuel. But I would not describe this day as easy or relaxing. It is beautiful, but it can also be wet, cold, tiring, expensive, and physically demanding, and I want you to know that before you go, not after. If you are confident driving in Icelandic weather, a South Coast road trip can give you freedom. But if you want less stress and a smoother experience, a private or small group South Coast tour can be a much better option. There is no wrong choice, only the wrong expectation. For me, the South Coast was one of the most powerful parts of my Iceland travel experience. Skogafoss impressed me with its strength, Kvernufoss surprised me the most, Reynisfjara reminded me to respect nature, Dyrhólaey gave me the most unforgettable views, and Seljalandsfoss gave the day a dramatic final scene. Each stop built on the last, and by the end, I felt like I had been through something, not just seen something. If this guide helped you plan your Iceland trip, leave a comment below. I'd love to hear which stop you're most excited about. And if you know someone planning an Iceland trip, share this video with them. Iceland gave me my most uncomfortable travel day in years. I would do it again tomorrow.